Okay, I don't know what happened there. Whoopsie daisy. As I was saying, not Marilyn Manson, but Marilyn Monroe spent a lot of time in this windmill house and the two windmill houses out on LI. So the government converted most of the land above the base to look like a national wildlife preserve. So as long as everybody below ground, basically the DOD owns and runs the soil that's out at Camp Hero, the DOD. So it's really not a safe place still. And it remains property to this day of the DOD. And then the dish operated at 400 to 425 megahertz frequencies. And that was supposedly what was the range to make somebody more docile, more neutralized, and other psionic techniques were used out there like that. But this frequency, I think it was broadcast all the time, every day, and it would just make somebody in a frozen semi-state like having scopolamine so that they could witness psychic torture deaths happening. And this bilocation and teleportation, these two terms are very similar. So it's hard to identify which one was which or which was happening at the time it did in a lot of your memories. Because many people, have seen me disappear, and I was sitting in a car and then they'll look out the window and I won't be there. Or I've had a lot of instances about things like that. And these are called situations of time and space displacement. I've also had other people see me like standing in a doorway looking at them when I'm actually in the kitchen, or just odd things like that. So was I actually projecting? Was I bilocating? I really don't know. And I've had just a lot of instances with this with people, or well, somebody will be thinking of me and then they'll see me in the chair. There's tons of things like that. And other people have natural things that they tried to amplify at Camp Hero, but sometimes these were also like an exegesis and a learned ability. Like some people are clairvoyant. I can be clairaudient, where I can hear what other people are saying when they're not even around me. Other times you can see people's physiology. You can catch it in pictures or in person, blurring in and out. And I call that phase conjunction sequencing. And during solar flares, a lot of people get a lot of migraines, and the spoofer spray and the neural dust and the nano dust and the smart dust, those all get very highly magnetized during solar storms and other geothermal and environmental situations. So they can be more volatile, I guess. So sometimes it's just best to stay indoors, especially if NASA is going to be spraying anything. So June 1983 was a big event at Brookhaven Labs, and then there was also many Plum Island experiments, and more girls were involved than what people realize. And this guy, Michael Ash, he escaped the Montauk Underground in like 1994. So there's still a lot of things going there, a lot of phantom energies happening. They just got repackaged and shuffled and moved around, and a different header for the name of it, because it really still doesn't have a footer, because nobody's gotten to the bottom of it. So the housing units near Camp Hero, I only saw like 10 houses out there in this cul-de-sac. Those are probably just still base personnel. And the project that was also there, they had little tiny sub-projects. The God Edge was the one where they use your subconscious to manifest and create objects out of thin air. And the computer systems, they all became so intelligent that they had to create safeguards so that they could try to shut them down, but that never really worked because they were always trying to open up Pandora's box. It seemed like at every opportunity they could get. And then they played with fire, and then they got burnt. So they were afraid of the computers creating their own reality, which is what happened at certain instances, until certain individuals had the ability to override that or shut it down, change it. Time waves were produced using small transistors, and they had to be controlled using those computers out there. And you could take an object from another time or a photo and then bring it back into that time because, well, you really didn't want to, because then you'd create an anomaly in that other time zone. So you always wanted to balance time, and you didn't want to damage the balance, because you would pass the point of time if the current timeline was running actively, and then there's consequences waiting for you when you tried to overlap little discrepancies or try to change even the smallest of things. So if you go and you stay too long out at Camp Hero, you're gonna be met by Jeeps most likely. And if you go and wander too far, especially at night, you're gonna be met by black SUVs. I mean, I took pictures of, I always catch a lot of things with my camera, and it's just a cell phone camera, but I got lots of pictures of these energy balls that were coming up out of the ground and forming patterns, kind of like they were jumping. And then I also caught arcs of energy coming out of bushes when I was out there. And then I posted those on a photo album I made called Montauk Survivors Aberration Healing Zone. So with the antennas, what they ended up doing was they just ended up beaming out a bunch of toxic shit into the atmosphere, which really polluted the etheric realms and the ether itself. So they directed the toxic, deadly radiation straight up into our atmosphere, but then they kept broadcasting all the mood-altering radiation daily. So then they tried to control the weather patterns, and then they tried to use us to control weather too. And there's these little weather wars out there. And of course, then time travel using the time tunnels and wormholes, because a wormhole has to have a beginning and end point, because you need to go back and forth. So that's a time locution, you call it. And portals are just intense energy spurts, but vortexes are something you could just open up one point, like in the Caucasus Mountains. And these manifestations of Montauk that are documented aren't really isolated incidences, but they have several occurrences. Nothing there just happened once. It was always like a domino effect. And the only ones that knew how to deal with situations like that were the ones that had stayed there the longest, or, the most highly spiritually operating individuals out there. It was a cluster all the time. And they even involved like a civilian air force, these civilians. So who knows where they got these operatives from. And, it seems like they just pulled some of them for reasons that if somebody's not going to be in tune with any multiple realities, then they could just hear one of these people's stories and just automatically write them off as a lunatic. Who knows where they kept them and everything, because there's a maze out there, top to bottom, and it never stopped, So the CERN plus D-Wave, using Nimrod's head of Osiris, Nimrod energy, opening up Sheol, plus the Department of Energy, is the continuations of those 80s projects. Because I've recalled the memory with slanty-eyed Asian beings, but usually the Asians that I remember in my memory had an alien aspect to them if you look further. And they were in a facility, and I was connected to this beast type tech that was probably CERN, but my mind kept perceiving it as me being laid on a steel table, and these Asian scientists were in white lab coats, and I could not stand the screeching or the piercing, the loud bursts of energy, and the sounds that came from this creature that I perceived as being Beowulf. So then I had to look farther into Beowulf, and Beowulf is definitely connected to CERN because it's called Beowulf Analysis Symbolic Interface Basin. And CERN document servers use a term called Beowulf, and it's a multi-core cluster computing basin. And the Beowulf project was started at CSONS, it's called, but that's part of NASA USRA. I'm not sure what that is, but in 94 that all started, and then there was the 16 node cluster that was developed for Earth and space sciences projects. It's called the ESS, and then that was at the Goddard Space Flight Center, the GSPFC, I think. And the spin-offs of that Beowulf are all over universities, and some of these names listed are like Black Adder, Tempest, and Lear, like John Lear's name, Parastation, Sparrow, Earth Dome, Llama, which was also a computer at Montauk, and Preston referred to that, but that's also called Monte Carlo too. And then there was Yggdrasil, and Spectra Cluster, Galaxy, Wolfpack, Icebox, Medusa, Wonderland, Hydra, which is spelled Hydra for the Beowulf subset, and Swarm, Brahma, Magic, Magic. Coincidence? Not. And then Aeneas, Aneas, Aeneas, the Hive, of course, Drexel, and Grendel and Beowulf. So it's this computer program that calculates infrared safe event shape variables for electron, positron, annihilation. And it's leading to, or is sometimes referred to as, quantum chromodynamics, QCD. And it demonstrates this precise method of calculation. And they say the style is analogous to Beowulf the Great, they call it. So that is the parameters of a parallel computer aimed at opening up and computing parallel realities. And they develop and disseminate parallel software, and scientists need expertise to develop parallel codes, parallel coding, and to invest time in tools for all sorts of data analysis tasks. So this Beowulf Analysis Symbolic Interface Basin system is a multi-user parallel data analysis and visualization framework. So you can conjecture all sorts of things with that alone. And it provides scientists with a suite of parallel brain, they call them parallel libraries, to astrophysics, data analysis, astronomy, and tools for data distribution and parallel operations on distributed data that allows them to develop new parallel libraries for their task at hand. So the thought transfer is another way that people are controlled and manipulated, and this reminds me of parallel computing and parallel systems. And it's called the Horizon Program. And this lady, Sharon Jacobs, who is SRA and part of the Mormons, she was talking about reptilians and other entities who could possess men impregnating women during these rituals. So when they're hybridizing a woman, she was saying that they implant a frequency code in the DNA of the offspring, and then that connects them vibrationally to these inner space plane entities, these interdimensionals. So they drink blood to maintain human form, basically. Their human codes would close the gap if they didn't drink blood, and they'd just look reptilian. So it's opening and closing in those genomics and the overlay. And the vampire types, they seek more emotional energies and that force and essence in order to acquire the energy that they need to infiltrate not just our bodies, but dimensionally. They have to stair step down. And they've genetically engineered themselves with warrior instinct bloodlines. And then what little connection they did have left to any type of spiritual side or enlightenment, they've pretty much eliminated and thrown out the window. And they're motivated by predatory instincts in a collective which seeks to, their own agenda to conquer and assimilate and consume, stalking from the shadows. They've been doing this since the Garden of Eden, hiding behind a tree and leaves in groves, which brings me to the Bohemian Grove and Lilith the Screech Owl. And there's been people talking about the rooms that were there, and one was called a dark room, one was called a leather room, then there was a necrophilia room, and one known as an underground lounge with the words UN on it. Underground, there's signs all over, I guess. And the proof of this genetic overlay switch system, I guess, is when a baby's born with a caudal appendage, a tail still. So there's codes from our reptilian past that have opened in people that should have remained closed and dormant. So then doctors remove this, and that closes the DNA codes. And, I've known people in Minnesota that have had 2 rows of teeth. I've known people that have had 6 fingers. I've known people that have had webbed feet. I met a lot of interesting characters and that have had mutations that are just carried from generations past. I've known people from the Holocaust, so any Holocaust deniers are a joke. So Professor X, Duncan Cameron, talking about feeding a strand of hair into a molecular computer. What he was doing is he would take a piece of one of the kids' hair, or a group of people, the kids at a time, and then he would try to remotely direct them or remotely control them and test the boundaries of that, and how psionically, I guess, we were bonded. So we try to program them remotely without using a computer. Some things were just done organically, but all the data was always fed into the computers. And nothing you did was not noticed or charted, because all eyes were on you at all times. And then he would also try to do this with groups of animals. And all this data and all the weird shit they did was the basis for opening the CERN projects. And then what's even connected to that, because it's not just CERN, it's other things in parts of the world that are connected to that even. So yeah, they would feed a strand of hair into a quantum computer, and then they have you cued into that then, and into that neural net. And it only keeps advancing itself. So Preston's schematics and research is what you see in these Beowulf systems and other things, and various CERN substrates. And truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. So I just wanted to share some of these thoughts and to tell you to stay blessed and not stressed. Peace.